Good morning. Thank you so much for joining today for Mocha with a Message. And today we are talking all about I-9s. So let me screen share here. Get in here. Okay, this will be a fun one. My guess is I have done 5,000 I-9s in the last 10 years, at least. No joke. When working for Oregon State University, we were serving the College of Business and the College of Engineering, and those schools specifically hire a ton of students for different roles. I think the only other possibly larger hiring group would have been maybe the dining halls, but our groups hired a ton of students. They hired a ton of international students, which is probably much more complicated than anything that most of the small businesses that we serve would ever run into. But I think that talking about I-9s, understanding the purpose and being in compliance with I-9 requirements is super important, not only because it's the law, but because there are some seriously heavy fines if you are not compliant. So that is what we are talking about today. We are trying to save you some money. So before we jump into the I-9 topic, just so you have a little bit of an idea, we're Bestephens HR Consulting. We actually have a team of 4 people, plus a couple babies running around. So you get a lot of people when you join our team. But basically think of us as your bolt-on HR department. We do a lot of different stuff. A lot of it is in compliance with state and federal laws. We do a lot of handbooks, helping companies not only be in compliance, but streamline their processes and procedures. We help with recruiting, which the state of recruitment in the world right now is very difficult based on a lot of different factors, which we talked about a couple months ago. But that is definitely still happening. We can help with training. If you are looking to implement an HR information system or applicant tracking system, or maybe you've got a employee issue that you're just not sure what to do with, we can help with all of those kinds of things. So let's talk a little bit about I-9. So I-9 is the form that employers use to ensure that the employees that they're hiring are eligible to work in the United States. That is very important, not only because it's the law, but because it's very expensive if you are not keeping your I-9s. Employers have an obligation to ensure they're hiring people with a legal right to work in the United States. That's enforced by USCIS and DHS. So like I mentioned, it is very expensive if you do it wrong. Some of the issues when I talk to employers about I-9s is it can be really confusing. There's a lot of different citizenship statuses. You can be a natural born citizen. You can have a permanent resident card, which is the same thing as a, some people call them a green card. There are very strict document requirements, which we'll kind of take a look at. Not only do you have to make sure that you are getting documents that are real, but also that they're not expired. We'll look at the list of documents. You're not allowed to tell an employee what documents they are or are not allowed to bring. You can suggest, you can say, most folks bring a passport if they have a passport, or most people will bring like a driver's license and a social security card, but you're not allowed to say you must bring this or this. That is against the law. There are nuances on the form, which again, we'll talk about when we look at an example. If an audit was triggered, so say you wound up hiring someone who knew that you were supposed to do an I-9 and they turned you in because you didn't do an I-9 for them, that would probably trigger an audit, and it can be very expensive. So depending on the number of employees you have, If you knowingly hire, recruit, refer, or retain someone who is not eligible to work in the United States, the first time you get $22.92 per person. If you don't correct that within the amount of time, or you have a subsequent offense, second offense can be anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000 for each person. Again, if they come back a third time, you're looking at $7,000 to up to $23,000 per person, which is very, very expensive. If you, again, if they go through an audit and they find errors, which, like I mentioned, there are a lot of nuances on the form, errors can very easily be made. If you have late I-9s, that's another thing. If you have any missing I-9s, the cost ranges again from $230 per error up to $22.92 per missing I-9. And so it can, again, be very expensive to do this wrong. So that brings us to how do we do it correctly? The law says that you need to ensure that you have on file an I-9 for each employee that you hire. And those should be kept separate from your employee files, but together and locked up. And really the reason behind that is an employee file is meant really for employment documents, which the I-9 is an employment document, but it has a lot of personal identifying information on it, as well as social security numbers, social security cards. Not that you would ever hire anybody who would misuse that employee's information, but you could wind up in a situation that you don't want to wind up in that kind of a case. So you must either copy the I-9 documents or not copy them. You just have to be consistent. I always like having copies of them so that if you hire 10 people on one day, it takes a little bit of time to fill out page 2 of the I-9, which is the employer section. And so it's just easier if you're doing an orientation to make the copies and go ahead and fill it out after your orientation. So you must always check the expiration date on your documents. So you want to be very careful, ensure that you are not collecting expired documentation. And I always recommend pulling a new I-9 from the USCIS's website. So these are just some quick tips that can help you ensure that you are ensuring compliance. So we're going to do a practice one. And these are documents that come from the employer handbook. So this is not somebody's real information, obviously. So let's see here if I can get this to pull up dually with this I-9 here. So this is what an I-9 looks like, and I've already filled this out for the sake of time. But typically what you'll do, you can give an employee their I-9 paperwork to fill out prior to them starting. You just cannot collect any of the documents prior to them starting. So when I'm sitting down with a new employee and I say, okay, here's what we're going to need on your first day in regards to I-9 paperwork. Page 3 has a list of acceptable documents. All of the documents that you provide have to be unexpired. And again, you're not allowed to tell them what they are required to bring, but you can suggest. So list A documents establish both identity and employment authorization. And so if they have a passport or a passport card, that's fantastic. That works for all of the documentation. You don't need to collect anything extra. If they don't have that, or they don't want to bring that, or they can't find it, or it's in mom and dad's garage somewhere, you can tell them that we need a document from list B and list C. So list B are documents that establish identity, and list C are documents that establish employment authorization. So most common thing that I see is a driver's license or state issued ID card. If you're hiring students, a student ID card with a photograph is fine. US military card is one that I've seen a lot. But yeah, so you can collect a document that establishes identity from here. And then on list C, documents that establish employment authorization, the most common things that I've seen is a social security card or a birth certificate. And one thing to really make sure that you look at, it's not super common, but again, having worked at the university, I saw this a lot. A social security card will typically look like this. It'll have the seal, it'll have the number. It will not have void on it. If it has void, don't accept it. But sometimes it will say right down at the bottom, it'll say not valid for employment, or valid for work only with DHS authorization. And so if you get something like that, then you're probably dealing with somebody who is not a US citizen or is on some sort of a visa here. And that will require a little bit more research into what is going on there. So just a couple things to kind of look out for. And okay, so we've given our new employee the I-9 paperwork and we say, go ahead and complete page 1. We'll take a look at it when you get here on your first day. And as the employer, we'll fill out page 2. So I usually say, fill out page 1, section 1, down to the preparer or translator section. So really what we're looking at, again, this is the employee filling this out. They're going to fill out last name, first name, middle initial. We recommend doing NA in the sections that they don't have any other things for. Address, all of this information should be filled out by the employee. And then here they're going to choose what their citizenship is. The most common thing that you're going to see is a citizen of the United States. If you have anything else, that is a little bit more complicated. And so we're not going to cover that necessarily in this call. But just be aware, if you have anything other than a citizen of the United States, then you're going to have to get more documentation from that person. And then they'll sign it, date it, and choose if they did or did not use a preparer or translator. If they did use a translator, then that translator or preparer needs to fill out this bottom section. Again, not super common, but could be depending on your industry and the folks that you're hiring. And so when they show up and they've got their stuff filled out and they give it to you, now it's the employer's time to fill out page 2. So you ask them, please provide me whatever documents that you want to provide to establish your identity and your employment authorization. And so in this case, Connor has provided us his Mississippi driver's license and his social security card. And so the first thing that we're going to do is make sure that all of the information on this matches what he wrote in here. And I have already done that, again, for the sake of time. And then on page 2, this is where, okay, you've made your copies. You've decided that's the process I want to follow. I'm going to make my copies. Orientation's over. I'm sitting down at my desk. So in looking at this, we are going to put in last name, first name, middle initial, exactly how he put it up here. And then in the citizenship immigration status, this is one of those nuances that can be a little confusing, but will be an error if you have an audit. So what they're looking for here is the number from page 1, not, so you don't write citizen here, you would put in number 1, which can be a little bit confusing. And this used to be a drop down. They must have just changed it. So it used to drop down and it would give you 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then you're going to come down. And so here's where you put your documents. If you have a passport, that's where you're going to fill out here in list A. But since he provided a driver's license and a social security card, so this is list B, which establishes the identity. And so we're going to fill out driver's license. Mississippi is the issuing authority. And most of the time, if you're not sure what the issuing authority is, most of the time it's whatever's in the seal of the document. So for example, on the social security card, Social Security Administration is what we're going to put over here in the issuing authority. Here in Oregon, at least on my driver's license, there's a little seal up in the corner that has state of Oregon. And so you could put Oregon or state of Oregon in there. And then you'll put your document numbers, the expiration date. Again, make sure that your documents that you're collecting are not expired. And then for social security cards, they don't have an expiration date. Same with birth certificates, you would just put NA. And again, this is going to be dependent on whatever documents they provide. Some other things that are super important, you'll put in their first day of employment, and then you must fill this out and review the employee's documents by the 3rd business day of their employment. So if they have not provided their documents to you by their 3rd business day, they are not eligible to work. And again, that's the law. Don't let them work if they have not provided their documents. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fire them right away. You can terminate them for not providing their documents, but if you give them a little bit of a grace period, if they need a day or two to go down to Social Security and get a new card or whatever, you can do that. And so in here, you're gonna sign, put the date. If for some reason it's, a week later, so the 3 days passes, they have not filled out, or they have not provided you their documentation, and it's next week, and we are now sitting down and filling this out. So maybe it's 12/12. Then what I usually do is up in this additional information section, put something like employee did not provide proof of identity until 12/12, something like that. So that's what you can do with that additional information section. And then you'll fill out your information, the employer's information, address, city, state, all that stuff. And that means you're done. So once you have that, you can file it with your other I-9s, save it in a locked place, again, separate from the employee file. Section 3 down here, re-verification and rehires. So this is if you say Connor leaves and next year we rehire him, you can fill out this information. You do still need to collect his new document. You do not need to re-verify a US citizen once their document expires. You only have to do this re-verification if you rehire them. So they've left and they've come back. Another thing that you can use Section 3 for a lot of the time is if they have a new name. So if you have somebody who gets married and they change their last name, there's a process that you need to do to get their updated document, driver's license, social security card, whatever document you're going to collect. And then fill out their new last name, save all of that same information with the same I-9. So don't fill out a whole new I-9, just do a re-verification. If you have a situation where they've gotten married again, that kind of a thing, then you may need to do a new page 2 to add to your I-9. That's pretty uncommon though. I've only had a couple of those ever. Okay. So let's keep going on this. Okay, so there is the example that we just looked at in more detail. Page 2 is what the employer fills out. And then what the heck do you do with your I-9s? So we talked about keeping them together, but separate from employee files in a locked location. The rule is when an employee terminates that you need to keep your I-9 for 3 years from the hire date or 1 year from the termination date, whichever is later. So we have a practical example here. If Connor was hired today and he quit next week, we would save it for 3 years after the hire date. So that should have been 12/3, sorry about that. 12/3/2024. If Connor is hired today and he retires in 2026, so in 5 years, we're going to keep it for 1 year past the termination date because it's more than 3 years past the hire date. That can be a little bit confusing, but if you just work through it, you'll get it figured out. And that is a quick and dirty of the I-9. Again, if you need more support, if you wind up finding someone who is not a US citizen and you need more help with that, we are happy to help. We've got lots of experience with that. And we have a chat. Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Accept signature. Yes. You can fill out as much of the I-9 as you want. You just cannot verify their documents until at least that first day of employment. So we shouldn't be reviewing the documents until they officially start. I hope that answers that. Do we have any other I-9 questions?
Brianna, not a question, but just a comment. While we're in COVID, they do have an exception for List B documents that have expired during COVID that can be treated as if they're not expired, right? So just a COVID related exception for the times that we're in currently.
Awesome. Perfect. Anything else? Awesome. Okay. Thank you guys so much for joining live. And we had some other folks who registered, so we will send this out afterwards like we normally do. But thank you so much for coming to Mocha with a Message and learning all about I-9s.